Hello, my name is Malak. I'm a PhD student at Imperial College London in the UK, and today I'm going to talk about kind of the intersection between information architecture and conversational design. My PhD topic is around conversational design and how do we design conversational AI that aligns better with our values as humans. So I'm going to talk a bit about the space of conversation design, and then I'll talk about the role of information architecture there and how kind of different roles can get involved with that. So a quick outline about what I'll cover today. You can see there's a lot of conversation and design on the slide. But essentially, I'll start with a bit about my background, my expertise. Then I'll do an overview of conversation design as a field. So what's happening, a quick history of it, how generative AI have changed things, and then other kind of interesting trends. I'll then do a crash course where I'll just explain very quickly like how conversation design works, what the process is like. Then I'll talk about how other different roles can get involved. So people like content managers, product managers, how can you kind of break into this space? I'll then talk about getting started with conversation design, where you can go to learn different skills and just get started in general. Then I'll talk about some ethical considerations to think about in this space before kind of wrapping up and leaving you with some other resources that you can look at as well. All right, so to get things kind of started, a bit about my background. So I grew up here in Cairo, in Egypt, and then I started off with doing computer engineering, so kind of on the tech coding side of things. And then for my master's and now PhD, which I'm doing in the UK, I switched to a field known as human-computer interaction. So this looks less up on the kind of technological side of things and more on the socio-tech side of things, which is basically the social aspects related to technology. So how do we build technology? Who builds technology? How is it built? How does it impact us and affect our lives? So looking more at those kind of aspects of things. And as I mentioned earlier, now my PhD looks specifically at conversational AI and how that's built and designed and how we can do that in better ways. So conversational AI is a term that's used for any technology that basically has a conversation with you. So this can be things like chatbots, such as ChatGPT, or many companies have on their websites a chatbot that can help you with stuff. Smart speakers like Alexa, like Google Home, intelligent agents on like robots. So if a robot is walking around and speaking to you, Siri on your phone. So any software or piece of tech that basically has a conversation with you, whether through text or through voice, where you can say something and it'll say something back and you keep responding to each other. That is what is meant by conversation AI. And while not every single conversation interface is built on AI or like using AI, the vast majority are, which is why I'm referring to it as conversation AI, which is the focus of this. So conversation design is actually nothing new. The very first kind of chatbot is called Eliza, and it was developed in the 60s at MIT. So it's not kind of a new technology per se. It's just now like recent advances such as ChatGPT and the kind of technology powering it have made it much more powerful and common across the world. And on the right here, you can see a survey that was done where companies were asked, like, where do you feel that like artificial intelligence would have the most impact? So this is for customer experience. And you can see like it has a lot of benefits. This is specifically around kind of chatbots and conversational AI. But for companies, it's very valuable because now a lot of customer service is done with chatbots. And so it frees up customer support agents. It helps customers get what they need more quickly. It's cheaper, obviously. So there are a lot of benefits for companies. And then as well, obviously, as individuals, if you've ever used ChatGPT, You can use it to write your emails, help you think and draft stuff. So it has a lot of power and a lot of benefit both for organizations and for individuals. Those advantages, I'll summarize some of them. So obviously we all know how to speak, we all know how to talk, or most of us at least. And so it's not a new skill to learn, like, for example, a lot of us with our parents, or grandparents even, we try to teach them how to use a computer or how to use an app, and it's a new kind of learning curve to learn this new skill. But with natural language, with talking, it's something we already all know how to do. And so it's a much more kind of easy and inclusive way to interact with technology. And then nowadays, you can create a conversational experience with or without coding. So even if you don't know how to code, there are a lot of platforms that allow you now to drag and drop kind of blocks, and I'll show you an example later. So even if you don't have technical coding knowledge, you can still get started with creating conversational experiences. And then the third point is that these experiences can go on so many different devices. So as I showed you earlier, this could be on a robot, it could be on a mobile phone, it could be in an app, on a website, in a video game. So it can really kind of fit in everywhere. And that makes it very, very powerful because it has so many different applications because of this. So these are just some of the kind of very high-level advantages of conversational AI and why it's so kind of popular, and it has the potential to make a lot of changes across a number of industries. And this is just a quick bar chart of the spending on AI systems. Obviously, this is all AI, all of AI systems, but a chunk of that goes to conversational AI. And as we can see, it's been rising and will continue to rise. So it's very much like a growing space. There's a lot of investment and spending in it. And it's only going to continue to grow. So it's really important to kind of be aware of it and then also learn how you can kind of get involved with it as well. And obviously, we cannot not mention generative AI. So generative AI, again, is a very big term. So it's stuff relating to, AI-generated art, falls under generative AI, but because I'm focusing on conversational AI specifically, the kind of what generative AI has created for conversational AI is called large language models, or LLMs. So you might not be familiar with the term, but basically large language models, you can think of it as generative AI for conversational AI. So these are, as the name implies, they are very large language models, where the model that allows the thing to speak to you is trained essentially on most of the internet. So that's so much training data from blogs, from websites, from anything that's publicly available on the internet. And because it has so much data to learn and take in, then it becomes very proficient at kind of having these very general conversations with you, handling your tasks, etc. Because the more data that an AI is trained on, the better it's going to perform. And so A, that's why it's called large language models, and B, that's why things like ChatGPT are very powerful. And essentially what this has allowed for with ChatGPT and other kind of similar platforms is that we've gone from narrow intelligence, where the AI, whatever its form may be, conversational or otherwise, is able to perform specific tasks or specific requests. So it can do 1, 2, 3, and then if it's asked to do anything outside 1, 2, 3, it simply cannot do it, or it's going to do it wrong. To a step towards general artificial intelligence. So obviously we are very, very far away from general artificial intelligence, which is what you might think of when you see like science fiction movies. So it's AI that's like as smart as us and can do anything and is going to take over the world. So we're not there yet, but it is a step towards more general AI, in the sense that something like ChatGPT does not have a specific set of use cases or requests that it can fulfill. Like, it can talk to you about anything, it can search for anything. Now there are also APIs and plugins that can allow it to do other tasks for you as well. So it doesn't have like, I can do 1, 2, 3, this is what I can help you with, and then anything outside that, I'm useless. That's not really the case anymore for a lot of these chatbots. And so that's the really kind of special thing that has made them much more powerful. other kind of interesting trends that have also been happening in this space that you might be less kind of aware of is something called personality adaptive conversation agents. So, as part of the design process for conversation agents, which we'll talk about later, um, one part of that is developing a persona for the user and a persona for the agent itself. So do you want this agent to be, friendly and bubbly and have a nice personality? Do you want it to be formal and cold? So typically, as you would design any other persona. And the idea is that the persona you design will be the persona of the, let's say, chatbot with everyone. But with personality adaptive conversational agents, it will be able to understand the personality of the person it's talking to and adapt its own personality to suit the user. And so it's no longer a fixed persona, it's always evolving depending on who it's speaking to. The second kind of trend is collaboratively designed conversation agents. So this is specifically the focus of my PhD, and it's about how can we design conversation agents with many different people in a collaborative way. So instead of just having, a data scientist or a software engineer or a conversation designer sitting alone creating these things, how can we bring all of these different people into the room along with, end users and design the thing together to make it more inclusive and more user-friendly. And then the last interesting trend is called embodied conversational agents. And this is where instead of, for example, a chatbot, you start having the conversational AI be put into a human-like thing. So whether that's an avatar on screen, like in a video game, or it's an actual kind of robot type thing that exists in physical space. In all cases, the conversation agent now kind of has a body, and other things can come into play like body language, facial expressions, etc. So that's another kind of interesting direction that within the field of conversation AI. So I hope this is a lot, obviously, of information coming at you quite quickly. I hope that made sense. Obviously, it's a massive space, and it's one that's evolving very quickly. But this is just kind of some very brief insights into some of the interesting things that are happening in this space right now. Next, I'll give a crash course, so hopefully this will make things a bit more kind of concrete in your mind around how things are done. So I'm going to walk through the process of how to design a conversation, for example. So this diagram on the slide is from the Conversation Design Institute, which I'll actually mention a bit later as well. The design process is quite similar in some ways to the design process of anything, but then obviously some parts are a bit different and specific for conversational AI. So the first step is to select your use case. So you have to understand, why am I building I'm just going to say chatbot for ease, but just remember that it can be any other form of conversation AI as well. But in this case, why are we building this chatbot? Is it to help with finance stuff? Is it a healthcare chatbot that's going to help you manage your health? Is it a customer service chatbot for a company? We have to understand the context, and we have to outline a number of use cases that the chatbot can help users with. So this would look very similar to other just use case selection phases for other technologies. So you need to think about who your target audience are, what are users' needs and pain points, what does their journey look like, where in that journey are they going to use the chatbot and for what, etc. So this part should be relatively straightforward. The next step is to understand what the chatbot needs and what the user needs. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the part where you would develop a persona for your user and a persona for your chatbot, and see how well those two match and how well they can serve each other. And this is the part where information architecture starts coming into play. So any chatbot in general, and this is before generative AI, can either be AI powered or it can be rule based. So if a chatbot is rule-based, that means it's hard-coded. I basically, as someone who's building it, I sit down and say, if you get message X, respond with Y. If you get message 1, respond with 2. So it's hard-coded, a set of rules. And if you message it anything outside these rules, it will simply default to some sort of error message or something. and it cannot handle that. And you basically tell it, for example, like if the user says hi, you're going to respond with hello, how can I help you today, for example. And then you have to go in and tell it, because there are so many ways to say hi, so you would have to tell it the things that mean hi are either hi or hi with 7 eyes, or hey, or hello, or good morning, or good afternoon. All these things in the end translate to hi. And you have to kind of think of as many examples of, hi, or how are you, or how can you help me, or I need help, or transfer me to a human. So all these different sentences and these needs, you have to think of all the possible ways that someone could write these things, and then let the chatbot know that these sentences mean this, and then tell the chatbot how to respond. So it's a bit of an old way of doing things, as you can imagine. And you typically wouldn't get a lot of rule-based chatbots these days. The things that they're very good at is things like FAQs, so frequently asked questions on websites or for companies. I think a lot of chatbots for those are still, or not a lot, but some are rule-based, because it's typically, you have the question, you have the answer. So if the user asks this question, answer with this. So how can I open a bank account, or why is this error message coming up, or something like that. So that's maybe one application where you could use a rule-based chatbot. But now the majority are AI powered. So this is why I keep referring to things as conversation AI, because a lot of these things will be powered by AI. And this makes it much faster to kind of have it learn the different things that someone might say and how to respond to those. So I'm going to dive into this a bit deeper in a second, but it should make more sense later. I'll just pass on to the next step, which is you then create two things: a sample dialogue and a design flowchart. So the sample dialogue is just a sample conversation to see how things kind of flow out, and design your flowchart. Your flowchart is a typical flowchart. So I'm going to show it on the next slide, but it's really just a normal flowchart that shows how the conversation is going to go. So if we take a look here, this flowchart shows a conversation which starts up here. So you would wait for the user to say something. Then the first thing is you check, did the user ask you to stop? So is the user saying bye, or I don't want to talk to you anymore, or something like that? If yes, then that's the end of the conversation. If no, then it asks, is the user requesting to start an activity that the robot can do? So did it ask for something that we can help it with? If no, then we're probably going to default to some sort of error. So here they say, should we move on to another topic? If they say no, then loop back to the top. If they say yes, then move on to that other topic. If they had said something from the beginning that we can help them with, then go do the activity and then come back. So this is very kind of generic and high level, but it's to help you understand what a conversation flowchart might look like. Typically, you would start with something called the happy path. So the happy path is the path where everything goes right. The robot can help the user. There's no error. Everything's fine. So normally you would design that first, the path where from start to end, everything is perfect and goes fine. And you would typically do that for the most common use case. So what you think people will want to ask the chatbot most frequently, and start with that. Then you would work on repair paths. So you would take that happy path, think of every single point where something might go wrong, or there's an error, or the chatbot doesn't understand the user, or the user wants to be transferred to a human, or whatever, and start working on those individual paths, which are called repair paths. And then the last thing you do is think about edge cases and long tails. So those are the very kind of niche use cases that not a lot of people might ask, but that you still want to handle anyway. So it might be something very specific to, I want to open a bank account, but I'm an international student. Do I need to give you my visa? Like it's a question that you might not get a lot, but it's still one that you want to be able to answer. So you're going to do that later after you've done the most common use cases, essentially. Then coming back to this like overall design process. So this was kind of this part. Then what would happen here is you would go on to Wizard of Oz, which is this WOZ. So if you've ever seen the movie Sorry, I completely forgot the name for some reason. The movie is actually called Wizard of Oz, or the book. You would know that, the Wizard of Oz is a man who pretends to be this great wizard, but it's actually just an ordinary man sitting in a machine. And this is a technique that's commonly used in human computer interaction where you pretend that the system works, but it doesn't actually work. So for a chatbot, for example, it could be that you give someone a mobile and tell them, here, you're going to talk to our fancy new chatbot, but it's actually just a human that is replying to them. And it's a way of doing user testing. So that's typically what would happen next. You would get a user, you would sit them down, have them talk to the chatbot, and there's a human answering them. But you would start to understand, how are people talking to it? What are they asking for? Is our flow chart correct, or does something not make sense? And then you would send it off to be actually kind of coded and built, and all the technical parts would be kind of created. So that's kind of the main design process for a conversation AI. And in terms of like building and what I mentioned earlier about information architecture and AI powered chatbots. So here I'm just going to comment briefly on the technical parts to make you really appreciate where information architecture comes in here. So before large language models came out, the way that things were typically done was that sentences were divided into intent and entities. So intent is the purpose of the sentence. So let's say I come to a bank chatbot and I say, I want to transfer £100 to my mom. So the intent of that sentence, or my intention basically when I say that sentence, is bank transfer, or, I want to do a bank transfer. Or for example, in my previous example, when I was mentioning like, hi, good morning, afternoon, the intention here is greeting, or starting the conversation. So the intent is just what is actually meant by the sentence that's coming in. And then entities are kind of pieces of data throughout the sentence that you need to kind of process and store and understand. So if we go back to I want to transfer £100 to my mom, the intent would be bank transfer, and then the entities would be maybe the £100, which is transfer amount, and my mom, which is transfer receiver. So that's an example. Then on the screen here also, the first example in the image is the user says best flights to Florida. So the intention here is they want flight tickets. Sorry. And then the entities that you need to kind of, like the data that you need to store is Florida, which is the location that they want the tickets for. And then there are two other examples as well, similarly. So that was it still is. So a lot of conversation AI is built using this idea of intents and entities. And then you have to train it to know all the different sentences that could mean the same intent, as I mentioned earlier. So a lot of stuff is still done this way, but then obviously now large language models and generative AI have made things a bit easier. So the way that stuff can work now is that you have this knowledge base. So as I mentioned, large language models are trained like on the internet, or at least on very, very large data sets. So they have this kind of general training. But then let's say you want a chatbot for your bank. It might not necessarily know all the information or the data needed to help people with your bank. So creating a knowledge base means basically you can think of it as doing like a Google Drive folder where you put in all the documents, articles, spreadsheets, anything that you would have used to basically train one of your customer support agents. So it could be documents with the bank's mission and vision, FAQs like how do you do stuff, processes, data about the bank, the documents that people require to open different types of accounts. So any information about how the bank works, questions the user might ask, all of this is put into the same place, which is now called your knowledge base. And then you would use prompts. So prompts just mean the messages that you're giving to the chatbot. So for example, I want to transfer £100 to my mom is a prompt. And essentially prompt engineering refers to how we can build like design prompts to get the information that we need. So people who are building the chatbot will typically do something called system prompts, which are, instead of prompts where I'm like asking a question or I'm requesting something, it's a prompt to the system itself on how to behave. So if I tell my chatbot, imagine you are a customer service agent in a multinational bank and respond to requests using, that personality. That's then a system prompt, because I'm asking, like, I'm telling it how to act, or I'm telling it what to say, who to be, etc. So a combination of knowledge base curation and prompt engineering are now used, and obviously this is much less technical and it's easier to kind of imagine and work with. And here there is a massive emphasis on information architecture, as you can imagine, because you need to structure this knowledge base in a way that matches how the chatbot works, how it can find information. Also for efficiency and speed, you also need to manage some sort of database to have all your system prompts. So here there's a much greater emphasis on information architecture, and you also get a rise of a number of new kind of job titles and roles here around doing information architecture for conversational AI. So things like conversational AI architect, content strategist, content curator, all these roles, which are essentially describing kind of the same tasks. So a bit more about this. Ignore kind of, this is a very technical diagram, but it just sums up what I was mentioning earlier, where you would have this knowledge base, and this could be documents and PDFs. It could be from another piece of software like Notion or Confluence or Trello or whatever, like wherever you keep your documents as an organization. Then these are accessed through a prompt that's then given to the large language model to provide the answer needed. So there are like system prompts where it's like, if you're asked about this, go search for this document, find it, and then build an answer and then give it back to the user. So that's what's happening kind of in the back end. And then this, I think, just says pretty much the same thing, where if the user asks, how do I do whatever, then you would go find the answer in the database, which is the knowledge source for the chatbot, and then it would prepare a nice prompt and then give it back. So that's how things would be working under the hood. Okay, now I'm going to cover how different roles can get involved and kind of shift into conversation design. So first, I'll talk about information architects. So your role is really, really critical for conversation design, and you already kind of have a lot of valuable skills. Things that you can kind of get started with is designing the overall structure and the organization of the knowledge base. So this is what the conversational AI will be referring to answer like users' questions and their responses. And it's going to be up to you to kind of structure and organize that in a way that's efficient, that makes sense with how the thing is built, etc. Similarly, you would have to kind of design the hierarchy of information within the conversation itself. So if we go back to like that conversation flow chart, you'd need to kind of guide users through the conversation effectively, structure, what comes where, which data is needed at which point, how would this data be structured, etc. So there is a lot of value that an information architect can kind of bring into the process. Next, product designers and managers. So I've kind of lumped them together, even though they technically do different things, but it's because they might have some similar skills. So the idea is that conversational agents don't sit in isolation. So as I mentioned before, these will either be part of an app, a website, a product, a robot, something that needs to kind of be designed and managed. And so from a managing perspective, you have to kind of balance the different elements of the product, just like any other product, and also work through the cycle of, design, prototype, test, etc. And then with product designers as well, they can help to kind of lead the overall design strategy and vision. They can define the user experience, interaction patterns. They can also help to conduct like user research and collaborate with other members of the team. So it is a product like any other product at the end of the day. And once you get experience with, how it's built and the stuff you need to look out for, then it's quite straightforward to kind of branch into this space. Some other valuable roles would be content designers. So obviously conversations are content in a way, as is the items that would be in the knowledge base. So it's up to you to kind of craft the dialogue, the messages that the chatbot would be sending, make it engaging, but also match the style and the tone and the personality that's decided on in the persona, but also align with the voice of the brand depending on who the chatbot is for. So it can be kind of considered content like any other content you would be working on. And then the last role I would cover is prompt engineering. So this is a new role in terms of like the title, and this is a more kind of technical role. So this could be seen as kind of back-end engineering in a way. So you'd be responsible for all the technical infrastructure in terms of like the model that needs to be trained to understand these prompts, which prompts would be the most efficient at getting the AI to do what you want it to do, and then also integrate all of this with the back end and your data sources. So more kind of on the technical side of things. But in any cases, in any of the kind of job roles I've mentioned, you already have valuable skills and valuable experiences that allow you to kind of branch into conversation design and bring value to the space. So if you want to get started with conversation design, two things I recommend is playing around with VoiceFlow. So VoiceFlow is a software that allows you to drag and drop different blocks to build or prototype conversational AI very quickly. So as you can see, you put in a block and then you might maybe type like what you want the chatbot to say, and then through the arrows you're basically designing the flowchart like I said earlier, but the software allows you to actually then open up a window similar to like Figma where you can then prototype the chatbot and it would go through the flow and work actually, so you can give it to users to try right away. So it's a really good way to kind of get started quickly. Then there's also the Conversation Design Institute, which I mentioned earlier, and these are the largest, or this is the largest institute that offers training and certification for conversation design. So if you want a certificate, a degree, you can go take a full course. If you just want to kind of get started quickly, there are training videos both for free on YouTube from the Conversation Design Institute, or on their website there are paid courses and trainings and things like that. So those I think are the two kind of quickest and easiest ways to get started with conversation design. Some things to think about, just because anything with AI is always tricky, and it's not like go and build whatever you want and do whatever you want. So there's a very famous app called Replica AI, which has built it's not just chatbot, I think it's basically an avatar. So it's one of those embodied conversational AI where it has a very realistic avatar and you can chat to it, you can even call it on the phone. And it's very famous because people have started kind of having relationships with them, having friendships with them, and becoming very attached. And then last year, the company making this app issued like an app update that made the AI companion things forget all about the users. So they had to kind of start building the relationship from scratch. And people were devastated. Like they described it as breaking up in a long-term relationship, or like losing a friend, or people took it like really, really hard. So it's very interesting. It's a technology that can be very realistic. And so it blurs the line between, is this a human, is this a machine? And things can get messy. So that's one thing to think about. So it's really best practice, for example, to always tell people that they're talking to a chatbot and not a real human. So that's just one thing to think about. And yeah, as I mentioned, to avoid kind of building things in a way where people can become very reliant or emotionally attached. There's also been issues with biases and stereotypes. So a lot of AI kind of behaves in biased ways in general, but with conversation AI, we have seen biases against gender. We've also seen biases in voice technologies against people who have strong accents. So that's one thing to think about. If something's trained off the internet, that's not always the greatest place to be. So just be aware of that and how you can kind of mitigate these biases. And then the last thing is about privacy and independence. So a lot of the time, the people using these things, because again, they're very easy to use, everyone knows how to have a conversation, they would just give information away without understanding how their data is stored, what it's being used for, how these things work at all. So it's always important to kind of either tell the users upfront, we're going to do this with your data, so please don't give away personal information, or not collect any personal information, but just be aware that you have a responsibility towards, the general public who's now using this technology quite a lot. All right, so just to summarize, because I know this was probably a very heavy presentation, so I've given you a quick overview of the history of conversation design, how it started with Eliza. Then we spoke about the advantages and why it's so powerful. We covered how generative AI has impacted the space. Then we talked about other trends like personality adaptive conversation agents and embodied conversation agents. We then did a crash course in conversation design. So we went through the design process. We looked at how to create the flowchart for a conversation and how the technical part is done, whether with intents and entities in the first place or with generative AI, now with knowledge bases and prompt engineering. We talked about how different roles like product managers and content designers can get involved, what to do if you want to get started with conversational design, and then a bit of like the ethics and things to think about if you're getting started in this space. I'll just leave you as well with a couple of additional resources you can look at. So there are many really, really good podcasts if you want to learn more about conversation design. I recommend View X World and the VoiceBot podcast, but especially View X World, which is run by Kane Sims, who is amazing. Among other people, of course. And then there's also a really good book called Conversations with Things. This is if you're looking for more textbook approach. So it's also written by two very prominent leaders in conversation design. And it's a really good book to get started with as well, if you want a more kind of reading academic-y way to get into things. And that's it for me. Thank you. I hope this presentation was useful and it wasn't too kind of complicated. But yeah, I'm open to any questions now.